Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. I am Virgil, and I'll be your host for the evening. This evening, we are going to play Final Fantasy VII. With great spiky hair comes great defiation of gravity. I'm just playing. But we are going to be playing Final Fantasy VII. And I'm going to be giving you some history of this game as we play through it. So let's just jump right in, have fun, and whoop some ass. Now, to start with, in 1987, Hironobu Sokuguchi, he was planning his retirement from this gaming company called Square, which is now Square Enix. But back in 1995, they were known as Square. Now, he was going to retire for the fact that after several failing games that they have created, they were going to go bankrupt. And he was just going to wipe his hand clean with the whole situation. He was like, we're going under. This seems like a good time to get out of this rat race. So I'm just going to retire. But he thought about it and he said, you know what? I'm going to give it one more shot. I'm going to make one more game. And if it hits off, I will postpone retirement and work towards this. He made Final Fantasy 1. And at this time, Enix, which they just bought out a long time ago, but Enix was their, their opposing factor in this. They had just dropped Dragon's Quest, and that is really what made Hironobu say, I'm going to give it one more shot. He says, I can do better than Dragon's Quest. So he dropped Final Fantasy 1. And this game just hit extremely hard. This game was remembered even after Square merged with Square Enix. This game is remembered as the game. It will forever be known throughout history as the game that changed everything for them. And now, 5 sequels later, we get Final Fantasy 6. Super awesome game in every aspect. And Sokuguchi was now their executive, was Square's executive, and he was known as their wunderkind. And they branched out to make more successful titles like Secret of Mana and Chrono Trigger. They earned a big place top Nintendo's third-party developers. Square did. And they slowly moved into the American market with, like I said, Final Fantasy VI in the can. And Sokuguchi and the rest of his team, they were sitting there and they had some big decisions to make on what their venerable series would be next. And these decisions would affect not only their game company, but the entire gaming industry with what they make next. So began the production of Final Fantasy VII. It started in late 1985, and it was a strict, hands-on approach to the series. Sokuguchi stayed in the background for Final Fantasy VI. But for this sequel, he said, hey, I'm going to step out and I'm going to lead this. I'm going to be the spearhead of this project. And he led with a mystery plot that was centered before the Final Fantasy VII that we know now. This is the Final Fantasy VII beta, you would say. It was a mystery plot, and it was centered around Midgar. Midgar was a perpetually dark capital city of Gaia. And it also had the familiar themes of rebels fighting a corrupt system, which was pursued by a hot-blooded detective, and the player's ultimate goal was to destroy Midgar in beta Final Fantasy VII. Now, when the director of the Chrono Trigger and the scenario writer for Final Fantasy V and VI stepped in, Yoshinori Kitase, and he came on board with this project. He worked with the co-writer Kosujiga Nojima, and he dropped the mystery angle of the game, and he brought in the game's opposing forces, Avalanche and Shinra, and Cloud and Sephiroth. They became the bigger focus of the game. Now, basic Final Fantasy gameplay by this time had already been established, and they only tweaked it a little bit were deemed necessary. The active time battle system, standard since Final Fantasy IV, it made a return, but they took out the desperation attacks. They were underused and didn't do that much in the game. They took out the desperation attacks, which were basically underpowered limit breaks, and they added the limit break system, which by definition was a mass adrenaline infused counterattack that built up as the character took damage. And this became a very big strategic aspect in the game, building and using limit breaks. It became a very strategic aspect to the combat system. And also, after years of forests, castles, and even a trip to the moon in one of the Final Fantasy games, Final Fantasy VI, I believe, they moved away from the fantasy setting that they were so used to in the Final Fantasy games, and they went for a more futuristic approach to the game this time. Following that trend, the art director Yusuke Noura, he fleshed out these big monolithic industrial playgrounds, and this big tiered city of Midgar, and these big hulking Mako reactors. He did a great job on it. Sakaguchi expected the series designer, which had done all of them before, Yoshitaka Amano, to put his touch on it, but Amano was busy opening workshops and exhibitions in France and New York, and it really limited his involvement in this game, which really sucks, because if we could have had him, it would have probably been a lot better too. Not to say it is awesome right now, but I believe it would have just been epic with him. But they turned instead to one of the minor monster designers, which name was Tetsuya Nomura, and he was like, "What? You really want me to spearhead the art design on this game?" He was stunned and flattered at the same time. It was his first shot as a design lead, and he attacked it hard. He seen that 7 was shaping up as a dark game, so his first design for the chief protagonist, Cloud Strife, was a slick, black-haired kid to contrast uber villain Sephiroth's silver hair. But unfortunately, they didn't go with it. They thought that it just didn't look very heroic on him. So they jumped up again and they replaced it with a spiky blonde hairdo. And they thought that lightened him up and kept him heroic, but also kept him with his prickly nature. And the colossal sword that he had by his side, instant win with everyone. They all loved it. It gained instant approval very quickly. And then you had the gruff leader, Barrett Wallace. They actually started him with a bow-shaped gun on his hand, but they threw that out the door and replaced it with the cyborg look with the gun arm. Very awesome. Super awesome. Loved it. Then they jumped to the Flower Girl, Savant Aerith was her original name, and they thought that this rounded out the list of available characters, and it was also designed to inject some very muchly needed femininity into the character build. Super awesome. You always gotta have that female. Then Sakaguchi and Katase decided that the cast was a little too thin, so they added another half dozen characters for the players to choose from. And they sweated every detail of designing these characters because they wanted it to be... excuse me, I don't know what's going on. They wanted it to be so awesome. They want this game to be the pinnacle of the new game era. But then they added Tifa Lockhart. She came in as a romantic competition for Cloud's affections against Aerith. And Nomura obsessed over the length and color of her skirt. He wanted it to counterpart Aerith's long pink dress. And actually they nearly settled on giving her pants. But they contradicted that and they gave her the short black skirt. And a very robust chest, might I add. Yeah. And then Cid, which had been a staple in Final Fantasy series since 2. So they wanted to keep him in there. And this one he became a foul-mouthed chain smoker. And this guy was so awesome. I loved his attitude in this one. It was just, it added that smart-ass jerk needed in the game to keep it the social level balanced. I loved it. It was awesome. He was hilarious. Laughed all the time because of him. And then they added the talking lion, Red 13. This guy, I loved him. They originally gave him the tattoos and a Native American motif, but they threw that out the door after Nomura set his tail on fire. And he said the reason for doing this is to add a little extra color. No real true answer from Nomura about that one. But they liked it, so they went with it. Then they wanted to add a cuteness factor to the game. So they added in the ninja thief, Yuffie Kisaragi. This girl, she added a cuteness factor, yeah, but I hated her. She kept stealing my stuff because I could never get the answer right to her questions and to stay focused on her. And she stole my stuff so many times and I wanted to choke her for it. And when you took her to her town, her hometown, she stole the freaking materia and ran off. That sucked. It really did, because I loved my materia and I didn't want nobody to take it from me. Okay, I'm going to take a quick break from the history here, and I'm going to discuss this boss battle strategy. Now with this boss, my game decided to mess up a little bit. Now with this boss, it's a very simple strategy to beating him. I don't see how anybody could lose to him, really. What you want to do is you just want to have Cloud use his bolt magic on him constantly. Do nothing else until you get Cloud's limit break, and then use his limit breaks whenever you get them. You just want to have Barret sit in the back and shoot him with his gun, and use his limit breaks whenever you get him. Never let their HP fall below 100. Anytime it gets to 100, heal them with a potion. And when the Scorpion raises his tail, do not attack, because he will counterattack with Tail Laser, which hurts like a bitch. Super awesome limit break right there. And this just showed you the mechanics of the battle. The way they did the battle system was super awesome. Really went all out for it. And if you follow that strategy, you should win. Should be no problem. None whatsoever. It should be victory. Dun, 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 dun. Dun, 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 dun. Yeah. That. Super awesome. Yeah. Okay. Now, we were at Yuffie Kisaragi. Okay, we discussed her. So we're gonna move on. Next is they added the mechanical puppet Cait Sith. Now, there's not much to say about this guy. I didn't really like him that much. I mean, he betrayed you at one point, but I don't know, he's a really confusing character. His persona is really confusing to figure out. But, I mean, I just don't care for him. He's a freaking cat that sits on the top of a puppet. I don't know, it says he's a mechanical puppet, but I don't really know what he's controlled by some Shinra agent, and you never figure out who it is, so, you know, that's that. And then they added Vincent Valentine. And this guy was one hard to figure out too, because his background changed constantly. It changed from a horror researcher to a detective to a chemist and then to an undead man of mystery. Because that's exactly what he is an undead man of mystery. I always thought he was a vampire myself, but you know. But they didn't stop there. Nomura didn't. He gave Final Fantasy's mascots, the Chocobos, a makeover. He took charge of animating the summon attacks, making them even cooler. He animated the limit breaks and even upped the story input as well. And it was just amazing. And on one late night, this suggestion became one of the most story twists in gaming history. It played right into Sakuchi's vision, though. He wanted to explore more ecological themes. He wanted it to be built around the idea that the planets were sources of living energy shared between people and the world around them in a constant ebb and flow. He wanted these abstract philosophies to be in. However, they weren't exactly suited to a visual narrative. I mean, they couldn't do it. But certainly, this was something that nobody had ever tried to put into a video game before. But nevertheless, Sakaguchi was adamant. Kitase responded though by coming up with the live stream, the network of spirit energies coursing through Gaia, the Earth. Suddenly, a nebulous theory solidified into 7's core story element, and even tied into a brand new combat upgrade system, the Materia. So it added to the story and to the combat. And as all these pieces started to connect, some of these long-held relationships dissolved. There was never any doubt this Final Fantasy would play on a Nintendo console, just like the previous 6 had. These were exciting days though, because it was right on the cusp of emergent 5th generation technology and 3D gaming. Sony PlayStation moved games off the cartridges at this time and onto CD-ROMs. This dramatically opened up the possibilities for any ambitious developers. Sakaguchi wanted Final Fantasy VII leading that charge from Nintendo's upcoming disc-fed consoles, the Ultra 64. And he pushed and pushed and pushed for this. He wanted this game to be spearheading the rest of the games for this era. And accordingly, 7 stepped off the 2D grid and into the breathtaking 3D world that was here now. With fully rendered battles and a fully working MIDI sound system traded in for Nobuo Uematsu's deeper compositions. This was awesome. This pulled the game to a whole new light. His soundtracks just pulled you into the game, made it so much more appealing. Nobuo Uematsu is a genius. That's all there is to it. Super deformed avatars that roam the world and field maps in the old Final Fantasy games switched to full-scale sprites, 4 battle screens, but all were rendered in 3-dimensional polygons. All. Now this was a big thing back then, because this was a new step in the game era. 7's production team swelled into the triple-digit numbers, with dozens of new faces working on 3D software packages that the veteran Final Fantasy team had never heard of before. They brought in these new people that knew about these 3D programs, and the Final Fantasy old veteran team was like, what the fuck is this? How do you even do this? They were stunned. Even Kitase, he found himself astonished by what these guys were trying to achieve. And he elated the size, the scope, the raw passion filling the entire project. It swept everyone up. They were making coding history, and they knew it. So they were extremely passionate about this. They wanted this game to be at its absolute peak. And then, all of a sudden, Nintendo came in and caved everything. They said, yo, this, our new system, it's not going to be using disc. We're going to stay with the cartridge based. And it crushed the team. It left Square hanging. They didn't, their passion for the project, they couldn't do it in a cartridge. And Sakaguchi knew that. And he's like, well, you know what? I'm not going to let this project diminish. You guys can take the about face and get out of my project. And he and Katase both, they had long experience. They had a long experience chopping game elements to fit Nintendo hardware limitations. Even though they had that, they were not going to do it this time. They said, we just cannot do it. This game it's got to keep going the way it is, because it is threading out awesome. And they said, you know what, we're just gonna go. They took their epicness to Sony instead. They said, you wanted to keep the cartridge, we're going to Sony because they got the CD-ROM. Now, as far as Nintendo saw it, that betrayal made Square the enemy. And the president of Nintendo, Hiroshi Yamauchi, he publicly vowed Final Fantasy would never appear on a Nintendo console again. Never. And this is a big thing because Final Fantasy was making Nintendo a lot of money. And they cut each other off just like that. Each company, they dumped the other stocks, they burned off all financial ties and severing every connection possible with each other. But Square delivered one last game, Super Mario RPG Legend of the Seven Stars. That was their final Nintendo game under the old partnership. In 1996 is when they released it. And they also snuck in a popular summoned dragon named Bahamut as a boss in that game, as a final middle finger to Nintendo. Now Square was completely committed to the game. This was it. They were doing this game and they were doing it right. All the production switched over to PlayStation development, and Seven's Labyrinth plot expanded even further because of this, because Sony had more money to put into the game with them. Players gained the ability to customize weapons. They gained the ability to boost spellcasting using materia. The small crystallized spears drawn from the live stream itself. Remember, I told you had a combat upgrade for it? Snowboarding was added, and snowboarding and chocobo racing minigames were added. They popped up everywhere, as well as opportunities for breeding new types of chocobos, which is freaking sweet. We love you guys for that. And you even needed, I believe, you bred chocobos. You had to have a special chocobo to get the Knights of the Round summon materia, which was super awesome. It even had branching dialogue trees, offered chances at romance, while some truly harsh boss battles against monstrous weapons, the Ruby and Emerald, though they became strictly optional. You didn't have to do it because they were so hard. The story advancement happened through in-game sequences, and amazingly 40 minutes of full-motion CGI cutscenes, and Tsukamochi adamant and cockishly decreed that it all had to run with no load screens. Pretty awesome, isn't it? If you're a younger player of video games, you probably don't think this is too awesome because you were born into the 360 and PS3 era. You're like, what the fuck? This ain't no big deal. This was a big fucking deal back in the day. I remember when playing I beat Final Fantasy VI, and Final Fantasy VII was announced, and I watched the trailer to that. I nearly creamed my fucking pants watching the trailer, because before we didn't have these 3D environments. We had a 16-bit game screen. I mean, it was all flat. And seeing this trailer, it was amazing. It really was. I mean, it was like Diablo 3 just recently released in the trailer. It was like watching the trailer for Diablo 3. I creamed myself when I watched that. I was like, oh! Okay, that was a bad, but yeah, it was so awesome. I'm telling you, oh my gosh. I remember I had to go to class or school the day Final Fantasy VII was released. And needless to say, I didn't get nothing done. I didn't do nothing. I even had my mom go pick up the game for me. I had it waiting at home for me when I got off. I got out of class that day. I went home. I didn't even bother eating, and I believe it was on a Friday, and that's all I did all week. I played Final Fantasy VII, and I'm sure a lot of my friends did too. It was good times, good times. All right, but back here now. And of course, this game release days, because of the all the stuff they were adding, the release delays peeled over and over. But the budget flew way past the $40 million mark that they had planned. Meanwhile, Sony planned out an ad campaign for North America that easily doubled the $40 million number, including primetime network commercials, spots in the Rolling Stone, Playboy, and Spin, plus various other comic books and Pepsi, and even a Pepsi tie-in. You need to go look into that commercial on YouTube. It is fucking awesome. Now, the public got its first real taste in August of 1996, when a bonus disc bundled with the fighting game Tobal #1 magazine, Square's first PlayStation release, featured pre-release demos of Final Fantasy Tactics, Saga Frontier, Bushido Blade, and Final Fantasy VII. A month later, attendees at the very first Tokyo Game Show were handed Square's preview extra at the door, featuring early Midgard missions with Aerith in the party, and Final Fantasy STI, an Ultra 64 demo using characters from 6 and 7's engine. Now, one look at Cloud Strife bearing his iconic Buster Sword sealed the deal. 4 months was too long to wait for the full release of this game. And, I mean, come on, if you watch that, you know my feeling, if you were back then. Final Fantasy VII released for the PlayStation in Japan on January 31st of 1997. Those guys have always got to get it before us because, hey, it's produced there. And then it was released in North America 9 months later. It was only the 4th Final Fantasy released in the US, because I believe 2 and 3 or 3 and 4 were not released in the US back then. If I'm calling wrong, tell me. I need to know this information. The opening scene, which we've already seen just now, it opened with Flower Girl, Aerith, Ares in the US, but was known as Aerith in Japan. The one bright spot in the dark industrial metropolis of Midgar. And she was this holy person. She was this nice, sweet girl in this big, dark city. The only world power left was the Shinra Electrical Power Company. Basically, our electric company in their world. They were the owners of the gigantic Mako reactors, harvesting energy directly from the life stream itself. Shinra kept the lights on by literally draining the life out of the planet. Midgar itself never saw daylight. Nothing grew there at all. And then with this big power, you gotta have some rebellion group. Then stepped in the eco-terrorist group Avalanche, led by Barrett Wallace, and was hitting back in hopes of saving Gaia from Shinra's greed. And then added a tac-turn new recruit signed on to help destroy the first Midgar's 8 reactors. They were going to blow these suckers up, and hard. Cloud Strife. Really big sword for hire. Get it? Really big sword for hire. Barrett didn't trust him at first, of course, for the fact his attitude was poor and his background as a former member of Shinra's elite soldiers. But Cloud made setting the first reactor, #1, to overload a breeze. Totally ripped that thing a hole, as you've just seen. Then they were heading back to the 7th Heaven, a bar doubling as Avalanche's safe house. So many cliches, but it's awesome though. Cloud got an opportunity to meet Aerith and to buy a flower from her. You could if you wanted to, you didn't have to. Then you get the choice to be giving it to Marlene, which is Barrett's excuse me, Barrett's younger daughter, or to Tifa Lockhart, a skilled battle monk. Punching stuff's awesome. She was a bartender at the Seventh Heaven, and also Cloud's childhood friend. It was the player's first ever in the Final Fantasy series to crack a role at a role-playing. To do role-playing. I'm tongue-tied. How do you say this? To take advantage of a romantic triangle by choosing who you wanted to be with, which it's pretty linear to which one you go, but you can make these little flirty things with them. And I don't like this scene of the game. It's boring because you have to watch this rail system thing, and I've seen it so many times. It's kind of bleh after so many times. My throat's getting sore. I've never talked this much before. Alright. And after... Oh, I'm not going to give away that part of the story. I don't want to say that. Yeah, see, here's where you gotta watch the scene. Now, in previous Final Fantasies, you've always usually lost a character, or a character's died, but it's always been revived for you, so you could use it again. But Sakaguchi and Katase, they sat down one day. They was like, you know what? We're not going to revive a character on this. We're going to kill a character off, but for the first time ever, we're not going to revive him for use. They were sick of bringing characters back to life. So they said death without consequences cheapens everything. And then one Sunday night, on a phone conversation with Katase, Nomura suggested they kill Aerith and bring out Tifa as the lead heroine. They killed... Oh my god, I hated when they did that. I loved Aerith, she was awesome. And the idea, it stuck hard, very hard with them. To me, too hard. And for some devastated players like me, I'm sure I'm not the only one, I myself insisted that there absolutely had to be some hidden way to bring the cheerful young woman back. I love Aerith, I really do, and I know I'm not the only one. We pointed at game inserts, like on the cover of the book that came with the game, Aerith gazing at the airship, the Highwind, which you didn't even get until long after her death. And we made that as proof that there had to be a way to bring her back to life. But it wasn't. It wasn't to be. Aerith? Oh my god. I'm sorry, but I love Aerith. And it was absolutely devastating to me when this happened. And I'm starting to get teary-eyed here. I don't know. But she was gone. That was it. And the scene afterward, when Cloud laid her down to rest in the live stream. Oh my god. Later in the live stream, and a decade later, she remains a poignant metaphor for loss. I mean, seriously, this was horrible. I mean, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Oh my boy. Oh jeez. Yeah, that was a devastating blow to the game. It was awesome though. It added a big story twist, and it just made me want to rip Sephiroth's head off. And it's just, oh my gosh, guys. I mean, I love Sephiroth. He's awesome. He's my favorite Final Fantasy villain, but I just want to murder him for that. It was horrible. That's just about it for my history right now. So let's see. I got the hiccups for some reason. Yeah. And this is the avalanche group right here that Cloud joins. And I'm pretty sure you figured that out by now. Don't get lazy now. Don't be scared of that explosion. Because the next one's gonna be bigger. And that's what she said. And we gotta regroup at the 7th heaven. But I believe that's it for right now. I'm sure you guys enjoyed it. I hope you did. I hope it was educational and informal. Hope you learned something. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm gonna save here. And we will see you guys next time. Peace out, boy. Rawr. Meow, rawr. See ya.